Hey everybody, Brutus on Baseball here, and we have a question from Nina. So let's see what she's got to ask.
Hey Brutus, can you explain how the baseball playoffs work? I know it's not East versus West, and I keep on hearing about like an American League and a National League, and I don't understand. Can you explain who's in each one and how the playoffs work? Thanks.
All right, thanks Nina for the question, and it's a really good and relevant one right now with the World Series happening. And stay tuned until the end. I'll give you one interesting fact that not everybody may know about. A lot of the major sports are split up by region, so they have an East Division and a West Division, and the best from each region ends up playing each other to determine who's the champion for that year. But baseball is not split up this way. As with many things, the answer to why baseball doesn't split it up by region is based on tradition. And you mentioned it briefly in your question too, the National League and the American League. These are the two different leagues that baseball is separated by. And those leagues have been around for so long, the National League since the 1870s, and the American League since around 1901, that baseball just keeps doing it that way. If you go back in time, these two leagues were actually rivals when they first started out, competing against each other to try to draw the best players to their teams or more fans to their stadiums to watch the games. But these two leagues eventually saw around 1903 that they could come together and form one entity which eventually became Major League Baseball. And if they combined their powers, their strengths, then together they would be able to have a monopoly on the game of baseball. That's why there's some cities that in baseball they actually have two Major League teams. The distinction between the leagues was so strong that it took a long time for the lines to actually be blurred. There was always an American League champion and a National League champion. And those teams would come together at the end of the season to play in the World Series to determine which team was the champion, but also in a way which league was actually the champion. And so within the American League and the National League, you do have regions split up. So there's divisions for East, Central, and West in both leagues. But still, despite those regions, the playoff teams in that league play each other to determine the one single winner for the American League and the one single winner for the National League, and they still come together to play in the World Series. I'm going to dive into a lot more detail about the setup of the league, how it actually came to be what it is, and how the playoffs have evolved over time. That's going to be a separate video, but it's going to go into a lot more detail, so you can check that out. In the meantime, I'm hoping that this gives you enough background information to understand why the World Series is not an East versus West, and how they actually decide which teams play against which for the World Series. Now, that interesting fact that I mentioned, the National League and the American League have been consistent throughout their entire history. If you are a National League team, you stay a National League team. If you're an American League team, you stay an American League team. Even if teams move cities, like the Giants or the Dodgers have moved across the country, they didn't change leagues. That's all true, except for two teams that have switched leagues in the history of the game. The first one was the Milwaukee Brewers, and the second one, the Houston Astros. So the last time the Phillies and the Astros played in the playoffs, they were actually playing each other to determine who would go to the World Series. But now that the Astros have switched leagues, the Phillies and Astros are playing each other for the first time in the World Series. Nina, thanks again for asking the question. I really appreciate it. And I would love to encourage anybody at home, if you have questions for me too, make a video and send me a message and let me know what your question is, and I will be happy to answer it. Until that time, take it easy, enjoy the World Series, and we'll see you around.